Hallo en welkom bij LogiTalks, onze serie gesprekken waarin we samen met experts gaan kijken naar de werkomgeving van de toekomst. Want hoe ziet onze werkplek er over een paar jaar uit? In ongeveer 20 minuten ga ik in gesprek met gasten over diverse ontwikkelingen en trends die we zien in het veld. Mijn naam is Annemarie van Kampen en ik heb de fijne taak om deze gesprekken te mogen begeleiden. Vandaag gaan we het hebben over de gezondheidszorg. We hebben eerder sessies opgenomen over andere zaken. Mocht je die willen bekijken, dat kan. Ga dan gewoon even naar de LogiTalks pagina op logitech.com en klik daar gerust doorheen. Vandaag dus gezondheidszorg. En ik ga in gesprek met mijn gast Evie Jensen. Evie is President and Chief Commercial Officer, and I will switch to English for this, at Swymed. And she spent the majority of her career in healthcare, has over 25 years of experience in business development and management. Evie, welcome. It's good to see you today.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you as well.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Where are you based today?
I am actually near Harlem, working in my home office, as virtually everyone in the world is that works in an office.
Well, thank you for joining me virtually here. I want to get right to it because I already mentioned telemedicine. Now, telemedicine and telehealth are two terms that we hear often and are quite similar, but what exactly is the difference between them?
Well, I have to say you're right, and people use them interchangeably. Telehealth, I think, encapsulates everything around tele and health, where telemedicine is really what we're doing right now when you're then speaking to a provider or your physician, and or incorporating medical devices that are then streamed live from one side where the patient is over to the far side where the physician is.
Right. So that is, in short, the difference between the two terms. It must have been incredibly important over the last year when we all are starting to work from home, live from home, couldn't go to the hospital in some cases. Yes. So what has happened in healthcare during the COVID-19 crisis? What impact did this have?
Well, as if you look at the numbers of how fast virtual visits grew from March until about December, it was literally like this. Mm-hmm. It was really out of necessity. So even health systems and hospitals and physicians that did not have this set up had to do it very quickly. Some were put in the position where they just had to use FaceTime, for instance, because they had no other option until they could get something implemented that was more privacy compliant and so forth. So you've seen a huge increase, and now you see that it has slowly gone down. It's still much higher than it was pre-COVID because people like the convenience of it, but it has decreased because people can now go back to see their physician in person.
So you've seen a sort of scramble at the start. How difficult was it for hospitals or for healthcare institutions to deal with this?
Well, I think it was very difficult for the ones that didn't have the infrastructure in place. Mm-hmm. So there were hospitals and physicians that did have something in place that they just had to grow it. So, all right, that has its own complexities, but that's much easier than starting from zero. So
your base was okay. Yes.
So you hear some real struggles, but also some great success stories.
And you said it's slowly declining again. Does that mean that we prefer the old way, or is this something that we should retain?
Well, it's declining from where it was when you were absolutely not allowed to go see your physician and go to the hospital, but it's still significantly higher than where it was pre-COVID. So that it tells us that people like the convenience of being able to do this via video. Not everything, of course. There's sometimes that you really want to have a personal connection with your physician, but there's oftentimes you just need to get blood test results, or you just need to check in to see how things are going, and you can do that, via a video. Not what Swymed necessarily focuses on, but this is really what came out in COVID, where the public sees.
Right. That's most familiar to us. So could you highlight, like, what is the part where Swymed comes in?
So where we focus on more is provider to provider. So we basically increase access for people that don't have access to easy access to a physician or a hospital. So think of more rural areas, and they might have a small clinic, but there's no neurologist or no dermatologist, and we beam that physician into that particular location. And then we have medical devices that are integrated into our platform so they can put a camera on that wound and have that dermatologist or a wound specialist look at the wound and be able to, give you advice as what to do without you having to travel 1 or 2 hours to get to see that person, or vice versa, them having to travel to you. And we do that in ambulances, we do that in homes, we do that in clinics, and we have multiple different use cases in the mobile world. And then we also, within the hospital, we will do teleradiology, telepathology, where a pathologist is beamed into the OR and they can look at a specimen to determine, whether the margins are clean or not. So there's probably 18 or 20 different use cases that we are involved in, but they're all with a provider, with a patient connected to a provider.
So you make the accessibility to these experts much easier, and tools as well.
Yes, and also we basically are more efficient with the resources that are available. So that's another way of looking at it. Like, for instance, the telepathology example is you don't have to have people running back and forth to the lab, or radiologists that are not working during the night. They can view that from afar in another country where they're awake. So it's a way to be more efficient with the resources that you do have.
And say you want to implement something like this, because you also told us about it could happen in a rural area. What are the requirements to implement one of those solutions?
So yeah, it can be a rural area. It can also be a city. It doesn't necessarily matter for us. We excel in the rural areas because we have a way that allows us to connect in areas where the connectivity is poor. So you are able to extend the reach of where you can use telemedicine. And really the first question that you have to ask is, what problem are you trying to solve? So is it increased access to just physicians in general? Is it increased access to specialists? Is it triage in an ambulance? Is it stroke assessment? And depending on what the answer to that question is, then there is advice given as to what that deployment would look like, what the workflows would be, and what type of software, our software, but what devices you would need integrated with that software.
And could it happen in any place, you say, or are there some things that need to be there already?
No, it can happen in any place. All you need is a tablet, a telephone, or a PC. It's an application as far as Swymed goes. Mm-hmm. And then as far as the medical devices go, these are devices that physicians are accustomed to using. So there's stethoscopes, there's different cameras, there's laryngoscopes, EKGs, ultrasounds. All of those are integrated into our platform and then on the patient side and then streamed real time. So there's not anything, let me say, it's special in the sense of unknown that's needed.
So if you're looking at starting something like this up, there's of course an investment that's involved, and oftentimes in these type of projects or experiments, maybe even that's looked upon as a bump in the road. So how can you smartly deal with that?
Well, you really have to look at what is going to be the return on that investment, right? So you can't just look at what the absolute cost is, but what are you going to save by implementing the program? So for instance, I'll just take the wound specialist example because we already spoke about that. So instead of a wound specialist, who there's not that many, having to travel from home to home, and that might be, 10 minutes in between, or it could be 30 minutes in between. And if it's in a rural area, they could be traveling an hour or more. Yeah. So they can only see so many patients in a day because a lot of their time is spent traveling. If they're sitting in an office and there are multiple medical assistants, so someone that doesn't necessarily have the same educational level, but it's very, capable of sitting with a patient and putting a camera on the wound of that patient, the wound specialist can literally go from one medical assistant to the next medical assistant to the next, and so they can see far more patients. So your billing is far more than if you're just traveling around. That's one example.
Way more efficient in dealing with their own office in this case.
Yeah, but you also see more, so you're billing more. So you are, adding 2, 3, 4 more patients a day. It all depends on what those parameters are. But that's where the return on investment comes, just in pure dollars and cents. And then you can also see what the increased outcomes are for those patients. So if they're putting off seeing you because they don't want to, drive there, they heal slower. So they need to be seen more. So there's those types of savings as well.
So there's benefits on both sides.
Exactly.
Are there some projects that you can highlight that have proven to be very successful using this type of technology?
So I'll give you one, which is, I'll give you one in the United States, and I'll give you one in India, which are two completely different types of markets. So we are in 18 to 20 different ambulances in the western part of Texas, which is no man's land. I mean, it's nothing for miles and miles. We cover 136,000 square miles, where there are very few clinics. And if there are, they're very small and not very well staffed. So the program is that if there is a trauma, a suspected heart attack, possible stroke, or an actual trauma, car accident or whatever, that the paramedics will contact the local clinic via our platform and have them take a look at the patient and decide at that moment, can they treat that patient, or they don't have the capabilities and that patient needs to go to the larger facility, and should that be by ambulance or helicopter? And so what you see is that the patient gets to the right place the first time. So a helicopter is not called for $40,000 if it's not needed. And it is called if it is needed. And one live example of that is a patient looked like they were having a heart attack. The local clinic said, you can't come here, because the patient wanted to, of course, because it's close to home and they know it. You can't come here. They got him to Lubbock, which is the regional medical center. He went into full cardiac arrest. And the paramedics called us that night and they said, if we had not spoken to that clinician and not gotten him to Lubbock, he would not be up and walking around right now.
Wow.
He wouldn't have made it.
So that's a huge impact that you made on this person's life.
A huge impact, exactly. And the other one that is a real feel-good story and project is in India, where we work with Piramal, which is our partner there, a nonprofit. And the Bill Gates Foundation, for instance, is one of the investors in this project, where it's an infant and maternal mortality program that is focused on the really rural areas of India. So you can imagine how difficult that is. And our software works in these conditions, and that was why we were chosen. So we are beaming in a gynecologist and obstetrician into these areas and checking on these high-risk women. And to give you one example, in one particular area, they had 400 deaths per 100,000, and it went down a couple of years ago, and it went down to 0 last year. That's not everywhere, but that in that one particular area, it was that good.
So it's an incredibly rewarding field to work in, I can imagine.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you really see the impact that it and has on people's lives.
Is that also why you chose healthcare to focus on?
Yeah, I've always been interested in healthcare ever since I was a kid. I don't know exactly why. When my first job out of school was in healthcare, and at one point I was working also for a company, but in the sales side and selling surgical staplers and endoscopic devices. So I was in the operating room all day long for several years. Did that also in Russia, if you can imagine. That was definitely an experience. It was a thing. And I've been in and out of healthcare my whole career.
So you just mentioned some issues that are happening in rural America and also rural India, which are two opposites, you would think. So if we look at the Netherlands and Europe, well, what is our biggest challenge here?
So I would say that one of them is access to specialists, because there's a shortage. The wound specialist is a perfect example, and that is actually a European example. Also, what is coming really online now within Europe are connected ambulances. So, for instance, we work with a partner and are in the Irish ambulance authorities ambulances in Ireland, so that they are able to immediately to the ED and be able to triage those patients and, again, assess where should they go immediately. Do they need to be stabilized, intubated, whatever the case may be? And there is, since COVID really, so COVID kind of sparked this interest in telemedicine in all different areas, not only what we're doing right now, but also in our business. So we have seen a dramatic increase, not only in interest, but actual deployments of these types of use cases. The other one is remote patient monitoring, which is where a patient that has chronic diseases stays at home and they have all the devices at home. So they might have blood pressure and their pulse ox and a scale, and they have all of those readings are done over a platform we're integrated with. And then that is sent to a dashboard that is monitored so that they are caught earlier, so they don't end up in the emergency department, they don't get sicker, and they don't have to visit their physician as often because those readings are being monitored. That's a big one in Europe as well as in the US.
And what's the response of patients to that? Because it's a whole new way of dealing with their illness or whatever is wrong with them.
I mean, you're always going to have some people that don't like it, right? That is such a, so few that we have seen even patients in their 70s and 80s, like well into their 80s, they really embrace, especially the remote patient monitoring, because they don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah,
right?
That makes sense, yeah.
And it's easy. I mean, and they make it, the companies make it so easy now so that you just have to, put the thing on your finger and it automatically gets sent to the platform, and then that automatically gets sent to the dashboard. So as long as there's not a lot of steps for them, the convenience far outweighs the technical challenges that they may have in the beginning, which are really few now. I mean, it's gotten better and better and better.
So even though they may not used to be or may not be used to using these type of devices, it's constructed in such a way that they basically cannot do it wrong.
Yeah, and they also, in many cases, they are used to them because they go to the doctor's office and they get a blood pressure cuff put on their arm every week or every 2 weeks. Yeah, glucometer, they might already use themselves. So they're not unfamiliar devices. And again, those devices become so easy. So there's very few obstacles with patients now on this type of thing.
It must be very empowering for them as well, that they can take care of this themselves.
Yeah, they do. And they also then are reminded to do things. For instance, you'll get a questionnaire. It's like, how did you sleep last night? Did you eat well? And so there's a sort of automatic diary that is kept of how they're feeling emotionally, but also how they're feeling physically. And then you have the actual, stats from the devices. So it's all very, complete.
So a lot more data for the physicians as well. Are they embracing the solutions in the same way as the patients are?
That's a good question. In many cases, yes. And again, you have some that are less enthusiastic because they're used to doing it the way that they've always done it. Yep. But again, I would say since COVID, that has changed dramatically because they were forced into doing this. So they had to get involved with their PC and get involved with their patients over a platform. So the step to the next one is far smaller, to go to the next use case and the next use case. And they see the benefits of it, both from their own time and efficiency, but also the patients.
And when it comes to, which of course is for both of them very important, the privacy and security of these things as well. Is that something that comes up every now and then? And how do you make sure that they feel confident about that?
Oh, of course, that's like one of the first things that comes up. So typically you go through something called a security review before that you're ever let on or into a network, whether health system or doctor's office. And so we've done many of those. And they basically are doing the audit on how the data is handled. We personally don't store any data. We are GDPR and HIPAA compliant. We use Microsoft Azure's cloud. So we don't run into any of those issues. That in the beginning was a thing, about privacy. But now that it's become so much more common, we don't really get that question. They just assume that you have all of that. And then they check to make sure it's to their standard.
So that's a way to deal with that as well. Of course, a very important aspect. Where do you think this is going? Because we see these first now, the progress that we're making. Where will this take us over the next couple of years?
Well, I can imagine that there's going to be a lot more done in the home. I was on a call yesterday, and actually with a European country, which I won't name because they're going to be going through an RFP, but we were calling it mittens. So basically having patients stay at home when typically you might stay that night in the hospital, they will have you stay at home and have all of this monitoring equipment in your home so that they can watch you and make sure that you're okay, and they can send a paramedic should something not be okay, but keep people more at home. And that's also good for infection rates, because often,
Of course,
no matter how clean hospitals try to stay and be, there are, germs and bacteria and viruses and so forth. And so it's actually better to be out of the hospital. So it's for the, the safety of the patient from this, from infection diseases, but also because it's convenient and it is less expensive, and you are taking, you're being much more efficient with your resources.
Yeah, so it really has benefits in all these different areas.
Mm-hmm.
To conclude, because our 20 minutes are already up, it goes so quickly. Is there anything, if a healthcare organization or someone working in health is watching right now, is there a piece of advice or a tip that you would like to bring across for them to take with them, if you want to take the first steps in this maybe?
So if within the area that we work in telemedicine, the first question is, as I mentioned earlier, is what problem are you trying to solve?
Right.
That really has to be defined. And then, what would you term that to be successful? What is that solution? What does the solution look like? And then you say, okay, we hit it out of the ballpark. Then you have to go and look and see what companies can actually help you meet those goals. And obviously, we would love to be involved in those discussions. But there's also other companies that may be a better fit.
And is there anything you in particular yourself are looking forward to? Maybe a new development or something that you're seeing that may be happening soon?
Well, the expansion, we have a big expansion going on in India because of the success of this infant and maternal mortality program. It's now, we're helping with COVID, which is great. And that's obviously really needed. I'm really excited about the digital ambulances, because that you really seen come online, where all of the, the EKG and pulse ox and all of those stats are going to be near real-time streamed to the ED. I'm giving you 3 things now, right? So, and also
so much to look forward to, yeah.
And this outmittance thing, because this has been talked about for several years. And now one of these European countries that we're working with, they're actually going to do it. And that is pretty cool.
Yeah, I can imagine how exciting that must be if you've been working around this for so many years already. For now, thank you so much for this conversation. Evie Jensen, president of Swymed. En I'm going to switch back to Dutch voor now. Want als je meer wil weten hierover, of alle voorbeelden die we gehoord hebben, als je werkzaam bent in de gezondheidszorg, of misschien eens met Evie zou willen sparren, stuur dan even een mailtje naar one-benelux@logitech.com en dan zorgen wij ervoor dat je antwoord krijgt. Wil je op de hoogte blijven van andere LogiTalks? Dat kan ook. Je moet daarvoor even naar de LogiTalk pagina gaan op logitech.com. Voor nu een hele fijne rest van je dag en graag tot ziens.